Hello, I've just read Chapter 8 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight, and we've been introduced to yet another character. What's his name? What's his name? Haninum Tyke Rainan. I'm just going to call him Tyke. He's referred to by his last name, Rainan, throughout most of the chapters, but I'm just going to call him Tyke because that's going to be a lot easier just to refer to him as. Um, So we pick up with this with Tyke, and he's being given a call to meet someone in 10 minutes. In the it's like it sets in like about a next to place. Um, okay, no, it's being used as a metaphor. Okay, I completely misread that then. Uh, but he's been brought into the presence of his master, and he makes his way over, and we're told again a little bit about his backstory, because of course we are. Um, and we're told that he's an Eloman, and that most of his species has been put into slavery, but he was saved from slavery and put into a position of power. And at the end of the chapter, it is revealed that it's Vader who is the one who rescued him from slavery, which I think is a very nice touch, as even though we don't see him get rescued, that says a lot about Vader. You know, it's because, of course, Vader in his youth was a slave and he couldn't rescue, his mother in time. And so it says a lot about Vader, and it shows a little bit of, little bit of Anakin coming through. So that was quite a nice touch. And we also learn that the Elomans are very perfectionists. Um, Tyke, is making sure his collars fits correctly. He notices a picture on his walls just a hair off center. Um, but he just is able to resist the urge to fix it, and we told how he can tell a lot about species from from their architecture, which is very Thrawn like. It'd be interesting to see a conversation about architecture and arts between Tyke and Thrawn. Again, I know he's not referred to as Tyke for the most part, but I'm just going to call him Tyke because it's just easier to refer to him that way. Eventually, he makes his way over to Vader's office in the palace. I assume it's the Imperial Palace, which in Legends is not the Jedi Temple. In canon, it's the Jedi Temple, but the Imperial Palace in Legends is a separate place, and I assume it's referring to the Imperial Palace. It just says palace, but I assume it's the Imperial Palace. Um, so yeah, and then when Vader appears, he just asks for Tyke to take a seat, and then we drop off from Tyke, and we go over back to Dender and I5. Uh, that's a great name for I5, I5. And this chapter, I think, only solidifies why I5 is probably my favourite character in the book so far. I think Den and I5 are probably my favourite characters in the book at the moment, just because they're so good. They're so good. Um, uh, uh, okay. Anyway, um, Zen's trying to is considering convincing I5 to just stop looking for Jax because they've tried looking for him and they've gone through basically every possible means and they just haven't been able to find him. And if he's alive, there's probably no chance of finding him at this point. And I5 looks at him and we're told about how I5's has been able to kind of replicate body language and able to kind of control his photoreceptors, which are basically just his eyes, um, to kind of give a human-like expression, which Den is able to pick up on because he was a reporter in the past, and it was his job to to document stuff no journalist, sorry, it was his job to, document stuff, etc. So he was able to pick up on that. And he's able to see that I5 is a bit smug at the moment. And I5 tells Jen that, well, he's located him and that their leads that they were given were false, but he's been able to pick up on a new one. And he says that he must be in the Yam sector, which is correct, but of course they don't know that. And Zane gets a bit all moody about it, about how it's the worst place in the galaxy, and he gets into a bit of a grumpy mood. Um, and eventually, I5 just tells them that it's calculated how much money they have, and they have just enough credits to get down to that sector on the speeder bus. And Zane gets all sarcastic and he goes, "Well, and just says like, well, that's great because of course my worries would have been how much money we have to go into the worst place on Coruscant, etc." And then we pick up with Jax Pavan, and the Empire have located him, and he has no escape route because his little room, if you can even call it that, is only 3 meters and is only 3 meters wide by 2, or long, whatever. It has no windows and is like 10 meters, or was it 10 centimeters? I think it was 10 centimeters. Yeah, 10 centimeters. Thick of ferrocrete, and his lightsaber wouldn't be able to burn through it in time to get out. And he thinks that, oh, Rocco must have reported him, and he's surprised that the Empire even took his words for it because, he's a criminal. Um, and then he starts having an inner voice trying to convince him to just let himself be killed by the Empire. And he has to shut that down. He doesn't know where it's come from, and then he starts noticing that his connection to the Force is flickering because the way he perceives the Force is threads, and he sees these threads coming through. He sees the threads on the door, on the doorway, indicating that there are stormtroopers coming, and for a brief moment those threads just disappear, and then they come back, and it happens so quickly that he's not even sure if it actually did, if his connection did falter for a moment, if it did flicker. But anyway, he takes out his lightsaber, and he recites the first part of the Jedi codes: there is no emotion, there is peace. And he says that this time he will kill the troopers. And that's where we end the chapter, and it looks like next chapter we're picking back up with Tyke and Vader. Yeah, this was quite an interesting chapter. I think it is starting to get to a point where are we having too many characters? But then again, in the book I'm writing, I have written in loads of characters who are plot relevant, so I can't really complain. I do like that we didn't go massively into Tyke's past though. At least for now, we weren't supposed to get a massive lore dump on what his past is. Yeah, next chapter or in the future chapters, but I'm glad we didn't go too deeply into what his life was like during the war, because it's starting to get old and repetitive at this point. It always just drags on. It does. It just drags on and on and on. So I'm glad that we're moving forward from that now. Um, I have no idea what his relevance is going to be. Um, it does kind of feel like, are they just introducing characters for the sake of introducing them at this point? But we'll see what relevance he has. Also, something quite interesting. Now they don't appear until, I know it's not Coruscant Nights 4, but I'm just going to call it that. They don't appear until Coruscant Nights 4, The Last Jedi, but there is an Inquisitor in that book called Renifer Wren, I know this because fan of Inquisitors, and they are an Eloman as well. And so it's quite interesting how, it's said in this book that the Eloman have been, put into slavery, but, Tyke was saved by Vader, and it's a bit, okay, so how is Rennifer Wren an Inquisitor? Wouldn't she, or he, as I don't remember, um, wasn't they be a slave as well? So yeah, it's interesting. Um, I5 and Zenda are continuing to be a highlight of the book. Their dynamic's great. I don't think Zenda's going to be in the book for very long. I don't think I could be wrong on that. I could be very wrong on that. But as far as I'm aware, he's not a main character in these books. I know Jax and I5 are. I think there's a Twilight coming up as well. That is a main. But yeah, I don't think Zen is a main. Again, I could be completely wrong on that, but so far, Zen and I5 are my favourite characters that have appeared so far. They're great. I love their dynamic. Zen's being level-headed and reasonable, while I5 is both oblivious yet smug yet hopeful. Not giving up. There's so much going on with I5 that he really is just a joy to read, and it adds so much needed humour and light into what really is what feels very much like a very dark and gritty book. It definitely, at least picturing the book in my head, it definitely feels very dark and very gritty stuff, but I5 and Ender's dynamic just is like a light in that darkness, and it really is just great to read them. Jax Pavan, I think it's interesting to see that he seems to be having some conflict with the dark side here. And it's also interesting to see that his connection with the Force is flickering. And it is also great that it's clarified that the way he sees the Force, which is with like threads, is the way he sees it, not just, how it's being described for this book. Um, uh, Again, I know it is brought up earlier in the book that different Jedi see the Force in different ways. So it's interesting to see how Jax is seeing it. Um, and it really does work as a great way to kind of visualize stuff. And if they ever did like adapt this into a show or movie, they really could do some great visualizations with the Force and Jax. They really could start doing like black threads extending around things. That's not what I'm picturing. You know, um, and it really is, it's a really good visualization. Um, Jax's character so far, I can't really speak much on it. I don't really, we haven't really been told a lot about who he is. Um, Again, so far the best ones in the books have been Ten and what's his name? I5, can't believe I forgot that. So yeah, I5 and Den have been the best in the book so far, character wise. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I mean, the book's starting to pick up some speed now, which it really needs to do that. It's been we're almost a quarter of the way through the book, and it's really dragging on. Um, So, it's good that it's actually picking up some speed now. Um, which, I've been saying for all of these reviews, it's just been, the chapters just keep dragging and dragging and dragging. Um, Wonder when part 1 ends, though. Because I haven't been able to find when that ends. Because it says part 1, Life During Wartime, which, I assume that's part 1 of the book. I can't seem to find when part 2 of the book starts. Now I've gone up to chapter 29. Can't find it. Looks. I went up to chapter 29. It looks like Danny's still in the book by then, so maybe he is the main. Yeah, but yeah. I think that just brings an end to this review. I don't have much else to say, but I really did enjoy this chapter. I think it's probably been the best chapter in the book so far. And I'm glad we got a balance of multiple characters in this chapter. You know, I think if it was just Tyke, I probably would have just said it's been very similar to a lot of the other chapters, but considering we're now forward in the plot with all the other characters as well, I think that's really helped this chapter be better and stand out from the rest. But yeah, that brings an end to this review, so thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone! So I've just read chapter 9 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight. So we pick back up with Tyke again. I know he keeps being referred to as Rahinan, but I'm never going to be able to get the pronunciation of his name right, so I'm just going to call him Tyke. We pick back up with Tyke, and Vader's approaching him, and of course he's terrified because it's Vader. And Vader asks for a report, and Tyke explains that Evan Peel's dead, and Vader tells him that he knows, he's felt it in the Force, and the Purge of the Jedi isn't really much of a concern at the moment. But he has made a request for him to try and find Jack's Pavan, which and he explains that he knows that Pavan's in the Yam sector, but it's important that Pavan doesn't know that he has Vader's interest. And he says that what does he say? Not gone too far back. He says that he and I have issues. And Tyke says that okay, but he'll need Vader to be more specific. Because the Yam sector's a big place, and he starts to get force choked. And then once he's released, he says that he'll be right on it. And he's dismissed, and he returns to the turbo lift, and he just thinks that didn't go badly at all. And he just kind of dismisses the force choke as a figment of his imagination. And something to not worry about unless he fails to find Jack's Pavan immediately. And then we cut back to Jack's Pavan, who of course is waiting to be attacked by the troopers. Then Nick Rostu comes to the rescue. He shoots down two of the troopers. Jax cuts down two of them with his lightsaber. For some reason, the fifth trooper is never explained. It's never explained what's happened to the fifth trooper. It seems to be they're keeping to have say there's 6 troopers and then there's only 5 troopers at the scene. Because that happened with Evan Peel, It they said that 6 troopers. It said in the first chapter that 5 troopers were pursuing Evan. Then Nick Ross saw 6 troopers go to the casino, and then there was only 5 troopers actually fighting Evan Peel in the casino when Nick got there. It was 6 troopers came to the scene at the Yam sector. I think it was. And there was only 5 that were actually tracking Jax down in the Coruscant Arms. And now they've only taken out 4 out of the 5, and yet the 5th is never mentioned. So yeah, it's a bit Anyway, Nick Ross, who's able to lead Jax over to a dead end, and he blows the hole, and they jump through, and they make a bit of conversation, and Jax knows Nick. They met a couple of times when Nick was in the Grand Army of the Republic. and he notices a scar on Nick's face that's on the left side of his cheekbone, and Nick says that he he says that it was a what does he say? Souvenir of a mangler's vibro braid. Don't worry, his is a lot worse. Um, and they make it over to Nick's skimmer, and they're planning to get off planet. And Nick says that he needs to talk with Jax, and Jax tells him he knows the place, and that's where we end the chapter. Generally, not a whole lot to talk about in this chapter, aside from whatever happened to that fifth trooper. It is also quite interesting to see just, how, like, he knew he messed up when he said he needs more information. He knew that and knew the joke was about to come when he said that. Overall, I am quite glad that, this chapter didn't drag on. And I know next chapter almost definitely won't, because it's only 3 pages long. Yeah, only 3 pages long. So I'll actually probably read that just once I finish this. But yeah. I enjoyed the chapter. I'm glad that, it didn't drag on. We just got straight to the point. We saw the meeting. The meeting didn't drag on. The conflict between Jax and Nick, honestly, even though it didn't drag on, I would have liked to have seen the fight last a little bit longer, but then again, it's Jax against Stormtroopers. There's not really a whole lot you can do to extend it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if we finally figure out what the quest is, because we've really been waiting. We waited 9 chapters for this. We're 80 pages in. Well, we've almost had to go through 100 pages just to find out what the plot is. And that's if we learn what the quest is in the next chapter, and this is a 300-page book, I've almost had to go through a third of it just to figure out. Yeah, 349-page book. But yeah, I enjoy the chapter. But I am going to read the next chapter pretty much right now, just because I want to, also give thoughts on that. And it's short. But yeah, I enjoyed it. Not a lot to say though. It is quite interesting to see how Tyke just easily dismisses the Force joke as figment of his imagination. And I think it is just a way for him to kind of just cope with just existing. It's just a way of him coping of just being able to survive. So yeah. But anyway, I don't really have a whole lot else to say. I enjoyed this. So yeah. This is definitely going to make it a lot harder for Den and I5 to find Jax though. So yeah. Anyways, thank you all for watching and goodbye. Okay, so I did exactly as I said. I finished my chapter 9 review and went straight onto chapter 10, because again it was only 3 pages long, and it was actually a really funny chapter. They find a restaurant that they go to, a hole-in-the-wall restaurant, and there's the start of the conversation Nick and Jax have is actually quite humorous, and it's nice to see a bit more comedy coming into the book, because again, for the most part, it's been very serious. I5 and Den have mainly been, for lack of a better words, the comic relief of the book so far. And Nick isn't very pleased with the seafood, because it looks to still be alive. And Jax kind of just dismisses it, saying that, he just dismisses it and eats it. But Nick can't stomach it, and he just says that this is worse. And he thought ration packs were difficult to choke down, and Jax warns him to keep his voice down, because the chef is preparing a Nexu fish, and they can be deadly poisonous, and he doesn't want him to mess it up. But eventually, of course, Nick brings up that Evan Peel's dead, and Jax says that he felt his death through the Force. He didn't know if it was for sure Evan, but he thought it was likely considering that, there's only few Jedi left. And we finally find out what the quest is that Evan Peel wanted him to complete. Um, and Nikos still tells him that has he heard of Whiplash? Of course, Jax has. And Mostu explains there's a droid he's got to find. I think I might as well just read this bit out. There's a droid you've got to find, while Sue glanced around and lowered his voice. It's a Series TO classification, number 10-4. Nicknames Bug Eyes. Seems it got its operating parameter messed up somehow and is for all purposes lost. It's carrying data vital to the resistance movements. What exactly I don't know. And then he goes on to eat one of the less responsive pieces of the Soviet, and he says it's not bad. And then he continues saying, "I guess it doesn't matter what the data are." That's a really weird sentence. What the data are, I think it should be used. But he says what matters is that the Emperor wants it. There's a command phrase that'll give you control over it. Zu Woomhammer. And he shrugs and says that he's told it's impolite what he's saying, and he says, anyway, Master Peel was looking for it when he was, of course, shot down by the troopers, and it was his time quest for Jax to fulfill the quest. And Jax says that even if he wasn't given the request to do it, he's in. And that's where we end the chapter. So we finally know what the quest is, and it's going to be interesting to see what information this droid has. It looks like we're picking back up with Zen and I-5 next chapter, which, I'm looking forward to. I think they've very quickly become my favourite characters in the book. So, yeah. The comedy in this chapter, again, it was only brief, but it was really good. It was really good. And it very much reminded me, the entire time while reading it, I thought I was kept on thinking of that scene from the 2003 Clone Wars where Anakin's feasting on the bugs, and everyone's just very disapproving of it all. And Anakin's trying to argue that you always told me to feast on the living force, and everyone's just is looking at him like, not like that. I didn't mean to feast on actual living things. So very much reminded me of that scene. And yeah, I really did enjoy this chapter just for the humour alone. It's going to be interesting to see what Bug Eyes is. It would be funny if Bug Eyes turns out to be I-5, but I don't think it is. He's a 3PO, not a TO. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. What was it? Yeah, TO and its designation 10-4. So probably TO 10-4. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, how this all, what this quest is actually going to be, and hopefully we can actually get into the plot now of the book. It only took us 10 chapters. But yeah, yeah, I enjoyed this chapter. Compared to the rest of the book, it was just nice and fun, and short. It didn't drag on at all. I'm glad the book isn't dragging on much now. It wouldn't surprise me though if we start getting back to it dragging on a little bit at times. So, but yeah. Anyway, I don't have much else to say. So, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.